Hiya, I'm Karen Elson.
Nothing like an egg and bacon sandwich.
What are we doing in Oldham? I guess we're going back to my roots, right? Retracing a lot of my sort of footsteps when I was young.
Karen Elson was born in 1979 in Oldham, England. She grew up in a working-class family. Her father was a carpenter, and her mother worked as a cashier. Their financial means were limited, but their household was filled with love and solidarity. In her childhood, she was known as a quiet, introverted, and somewhat dreamy girl. Her red hair and pale skin made her different from her peers, often leading to teasing at school. These experiences created a deep sense of insecurity in her. Despite the hardships of her early years, Karen found solace in creativity. She loved drawing, writing in her diary, and secretly singing to herself in her room. These small escapes were her way of dreaming beyond the narrow streets of Oldham. At times, she imagined herself in a world of music and art, even if she never thought it would be possible. By the age of 16, her unique look, once a source of bullying, began to catch the eye of others. Her tall frame, striking red hair, and pale complexion suddenly seemed less like flaws and more like traits that stood out. When a local photographer noticed her at a school event, he encouraged her to try modeling. Karen laughed at the idea, thinking it absurd, but curiosity lingered. Her first step into fashion happened almost by accident. She attended a small local modeling competition, more for fun than ambition. She didn't expect to be noticed, yet she walked away with offers that hinted at a much larger world beyond her town. Karen was hesitant. She was still battling her self-doubt, but something inside her urged her to take the leap. At 17, Karen signed with an agency in Manchester. It wasn't glamorous at first. She commuted by bus to casting calls, often rejected, sometimes ridiculed for her unconventional look. But every no only pushed her to sharpen her resolve. She began to realize that what set her apart could also become her greatest strength. Her breakthrough moment came in 1997 when she was discovered by Steven Meisel, one of the most powerful fashion photographers of the time. Meisel saw something raw and magnetic in her that others had overlooked. When she appeared on the cover of Italian Vogue, her fiery red hair and ethereal beauty stunned the industry. Overnight, she went from an insecure teenager in Oldham to one of the most talked about new faces in fashion. But with sudden fame came new challenges. The same features that made her a star also drew criticism. Some called her too strange. Others said she didn't fit the mold of the glamorous 90s supermodels. Karen, however, refused to bend. She embraced her individuality, determined to prove that beauty didn't have to fit into one narrow box. As her career gained momentum, she quickly became a muse for some of the most innovative designers of the era. Alexander McQueen, known for his theatrical and often provocative shows, adored her striking look. Marc Jacobs also saw in her a face that could represent a new era of fashion, one that valued uniqueness over conformity. For Karen, these collaborations were more than just jobs. They were affirmations that she belonged. Yet, beneath the glamour, she still carried the scars of her past. She often spoke about the contrast between how the world saw her, an untouchable fashion icon, and how she felt inside. The shy, insecure girl from Oldham had never completely disappeared. This tension between her external image and internal reality would become one of the central themes of her story. By the early 2000s, Karen Elson was no longer just a rising model. She was a force. She walked for Dior, Chanel, and Valentino. Her face appeared on countless magazine covers, and her otherworldly presence made her unforgettable on every runway. Still, she knew her journey was only beginning, and the struggle she had faced growing up continued to shape the woman she was becoming. By the early 2000s, Karen Elson had become one of the most distinctive faces in the fashion industry. Her unusual beauty, a mix of fiery red hair, pale skin, and striking bone structure, set her apart in a world still dominated by conventional supermodel ideals. She was no longer just the girl from Oldham. She was walking the runways of New York, Paris, and Milan, and fashion editors couldn't get enough of her. Her collaborations with Marc Jacobs and Alexander McQueen were especially iconic. With McQueen, Karen found herself in shows that were more like theater than fashion, complete with dramatic lighting, eerie sets, and costumes that challenged every boundary. She later said that working with him felt like stepping into a dream, or sometimes a nightmare. Yet she thrived in this environment, her haunting presence perfectly suited to McQueen's darkly imaginative vision. Marc Jacobs, on the other hand, saw a different side of Karen. For him, she represented a new era of elegance, one that wasn't about glossy perfection, but about authenticity and individuality. She became one of his muses, appearing in campaigns that defined the early 2000s aesthetic. For Karen, these collaborations weren't just jobs. They were moments that affirmed her place in fashion history. But the industry was demanding, and Karen was still learning how to navigate it. She often recalled moments when she felt overwhelmed by the pressure to fit into impossible standards. At the time, the early 2000s were an era obsessed with thinness, and Karen's naturally slender frame made her the subject of endless commentary. She admitted that the constant scrutiny could be exhausting, yet she also recognized that her very differences were what made her memorable. During this period, she also began exploring new creative outlets. While her modeling career was flourishing, Karen found herself increasingly drawn to music. She had always loved singing privately, but now she began performing in small venues in New York, testing her voice in front of live audiences. It was a side of her that few in the fashion industry knew, and for her, it was liberating. At the same time, Karen's personal life began to intersect with her public persona. In the early 2000s, she met musician Jack White of the White Stripes, and their connection quickly blossomed into one of the most high-profile relationships in both fashion and music. The two married in 2005 and had children together, giving Karen a new dimension beyond her modeling career. For many, she became proof that a supermodel could be both an artist and a devoted mother. Her life during these years was a whirlwind of photo shoots, runway shows, music rehearsals, and family life. She often joked that she never felt like she truly belonged to just one world, fashion, music, or family, but was constantly moving between all three. That tension, however, became part of her charm. She wasn't trying to be a conventional model anymore. She was carving out her own definition of success. In interviews, Karen reflected on how surreal it felt to go from being the bullied girl in Oldham to walking for Chanel or Dior. She said the transformation didn't erase her insecurities, but gave her a platform to channel them. Her story resonated with fans who admired not just her beauty, but her resilience. She was no longer just a mannequin for designers. She was a woman with a voice, and she was beginning to use it more boldly. By the middle of the decade, Karen Elson had become more than a fashion star. She was a cultural figure. Her face was on billboards, her walk was instantly recognizable, and her music was beginning to reach listeners who had no idea she was a model. It was the start of a new chapter, one that would continue to blur the lines between art, fashion, and personal identity. By the late 2000s, Karen Elson was firmly established as one of the most recognizable models of her generation. But what made her stand out wasn't just her striking looks. It was her refusal to fit into the standard mold the fashion world tried to impose. She had become a symbol of individuality, and designers embraced her precisely because she wasn't like anyone else. In 2010, Karen took a bold step and released her debut solo album, The Ghost Who Walks. The title alone reflected the duality of her life, a woman adored on the runway, but haunted by her insecurities off stage. Produced by her then-husband, Jack White, the album revealed a hauntingly beautiful voice that critics compared to folk legends. It was raw, authentic, and completely different from what people expected from a model-turned-singer. The album was well received, proving that Karen wasn't just dabbling in music, she was serious about it. Songs like The Truth Is in the Dirt and Pretty Babies showcased her ability to blend storytelling with emotion, creating a sound that was entirely her own. She performed on major stages, from intimate clubs to international festivals, where audiences quickly realized she wasn't hiding behind her fame, she was reinventing herself. This foray into music was more than a career move. It was a personal declaration. For Karen, it was proof that she could escape the narrow definitions of the fashion industry. She wasn't just a muse for others, she was an artist in her own right. And yet, even as she built her music career, fashion never let go of her completely. She continued working with high-profile brands like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, and Dolce & Gabbana. Campaign after campaign, her face remained in demand, but now she balanced two worlds, strutting down the runway and standing behind a microphone. This dual identity became part of her charm. She represented the possibility that you didn't have to choose just one path. You could create your own. Karen also became known for her outspokenness during this time. She began addressing issues in the modeling industry that many others were too afraid to talk about: body image pressures, unfair treatment, and the lack of diversity. She used her platform not only to share her art, but also to advocate for change. And this gave her an authenticity that many models lacked, and fans admired her honesty. Her personal life, however, wasn't free of challenges. Her marriage to Jack White, though filled with creative collaboration, was also marked by strains. In 2011, the couple announced their separation in a unique way, with a joint divorce party. Instead of hiding from the public eye, they celebrated their years together and promised to remain friends and co-parents. The unconventional announcement made headlines, but for Karen, it was simply another way of refusing to conform. Through all of this, she remained committed to carving her own path. Whether in fashion or music, she didn't let labels define her. She was the model who became a musician, the muse who became a voice, the woman who dared to step outside the boundaries others placed on her. By the mid-2010s, Karen Elson's story had already proven that her legacy wasn't limited to glossy magazine covers. She had shown the world that even in industries obsessed with perfection, there was room for imperfection, honesty, and individuality. And for Karen, that was the truest form of success. By 2015, Karen Elson had already proven that she was more than a model. Her music career was thriving alongside her fashion work, and she was gaining recognition as a voice of integrity in industries that often silenced women. But this stage of her journey wasn't only about personal success. It was about influence, mentorship, and building a lasting legacy. She continued to collaborate with major fashion houses like Gucci, Prada, and Valentino. But she no longer approached modeling as her sole identity. For Karen, every runway appearance was now an opportunity to make a statement about individuality and resilience. Her haunting presence on the catwalk had matured into something powerful, less about youthful beauty and more about commanding authority. Her second album, Double Roses, released in 2017, further solidified her artistry. The record showcased a softer, more reflective side of Karen. Critics praised its depth, noting how it blended melancholy with strength, intimacy with grandeur. Through her music, Karen shared emotions she had once kept hidden, turning vulnerability into a form of empowerment. Songs like Call Your Name and A Million Stars resonated with listeners not just because of their melodies, but because of the authenticity behind them. At the same time, Karen deepened her involvement in activism. She spoke publicly about the challenges models faced: the lack of diversity, the pressure of body image, and the silence around exploitation. She lent her voice to campaigns promoting sustainable fashion, calling out the environmental costs of an industry obsessed with fast trends. For many young models, Karen became an example of how to survive and thrive without losing one's sense of self. Her personal life also reflected this new maturity. After her separation from Jack White, she focused on raising their 2 children while balancing her demanding career. She often emphasized the importance of motherhood in interviews, describing it as her most grounding role. Her children reminded her of the value of authenticity, of staying true even when the world demanded masks. Karen also began mentoring young talent, both in fashion and music. She shared her own experiences of rejection, criticism, and reinvention, teaching others that the very traits people mocked could one day become their strengths. Her workshops and talks inspired a new generation to embrace difference instead of hiding it. By the late 2010s, Karen had transitioned from being the industry's muse to being its voice of conscience. She wasn't just walking runways, she was shaping conversations about what fashion should represent in the modern world. Her presence carried weight, not just because of her beauty, but because of the courage she showed in challenging the systems that once tried to define her. By the early 2020s, Karen Elson was no longer just a supermodel or a musician. She had become a cultural figure whose influence spanned multiple industries. Her presence in fashion was still strong, but her impact now stretched far beyond the runway. She continued to appear in high-profile campaigns and on magazine covers, but the narrative had shifted. She was celebrated not only for her beauty, but for her resilience, artistry, and activism. She had proven that a model's story didn't have to end when the spotlight dimmed, that it could evolve, deepen, and inspire. In 2024, she launched her own festival, Red Echoes, an event that combined music and fashion in one space. For Karen, it was the realization of a dream, to create a platform where art could live without borders. Audiences watched designers showcase their collections, while musicians, including Karen herself, performed live. It was more than a festival. It was a statement about the interconnectedness of creativity. That same year, she partnered with organizations to support young female artists. Through scholarships and mentorship, dozens of women gained opportunities to pursue careers in the arts. Her name became associated with empowerment, proving that her legacy was not only built on personal achievements, but also on lifting others up. Her reflections during this period carried a sense of peace. Quote, "Not every step was planned, but everything made me who I am," she said in an interview. Those words became a mantra for fans who admired her ability to embrace life's unpredictability. For Karen, success was not about control, but about acceptance and reinvention. As she looked back, Karen acknowledged both the pain and the triumphs of her journey, from being bullied as a child for her red hair to becoming a global icon, from the pressures of the runway to the vulnerability of music. Every stage had shaped her into a multifaceted artist and woman. Today, Karen Elson remains a force of inspiration. She still models, still sings, and still challenges the norms of industries that often demand conformity. But perhaps her greatest lesson to the world is this: difference is not a weakness. It is the most powerful way to leave a mark that time cannot erase.